Am I audible? শুনতে পাচ্ছো?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you see my PPT?
Sir.
Okay. Good noon, students. Today we have to discuss about the equipment for solid mixing. This is one of the most important parts of solid mixing because the all solid mixing process are going to be established, are going to be finished by using some important and valuable equipments or instrument which are using normally in laboratory as well as in large scale purpose also. And there is an differentiated between the laboratory equipment and the industrial or large manufacturing equipment. So first, we have to know that during mixing, what type of factors is affecting the uniform mixing and reduce the mixing quality or induce the mixing quality during of solid mixing. Okay. So first, we have come today to what are the factors influencing the mixing. So there are several factors are influence or affect the mixing process. These factors we have maintained during the mixing process. It can induce the mixing process or reduce the mixing quality of the solids. So what are the factors? First factor is the nature of the surface. Here mention that nature of the surface means the surface nature of the particles. If your particle consists rough surface, irregular surface, causes it have some pore in their present in their surface, some porosity present in their surface. So due to the presence of porosity or pores in the surface of the particles, so during mixing, what happened? When you added some rough surface particles with some active ingredients, during mixing is going on, but the active ingredients or active substance or other excipients are entrapped in between the pores of the ingredients. So that time the uniform mixing it should not be happen. So this is the problem is going on when your particle surface is rough. Next is the density of the particles. Density of the particles means when your materials, when your powder consists some amount of water, some amount of other particles, that causes the density or the weight of the particle is increases. So when your material is become dense, what happened? It's come into the downwards portion of the mixing equipment or downwards floor of the mixing equipment, and it settle down on the downward portions. So during the mixing, if your particles are settled down in your downward portions, what happen? These particles are not mixed with the other particles, and it is not be connected with the blade or paddles whatever present in the mixing vessels. So they are separate with each other from the dense particle to the undense particles. Dense particles is coming to the downward portions and other particles is coming to the upward portions. So there are two segregation, two separations are happen with the dense particles. So we have to take the moisture free particles during mixing. Next is the particle size. Particle size, it is the most important factors in during mixings. If your particle size is too large or various types of particles you are taken in this mixing process, and if you are taken in the two types or three types of particle size mixer powders, that time what happen? Due to the variation of size, separation of particles is happen during the mixing due to the higher gravitational force of large particles. You have taken the three types of particles, small, medium, and large. During mixing, what happened? The large particles, those have molecular weight is high. It have high gravitational force. So due to the presence of higher gravitational force, it's again coming settle on the downward portions of the equipment. So there is a separation is happen between the three particles. So uniform mixing should not be happen. So that's why we are estimated a particular portions or particular particle size which is used in case of mixing industry or mixing process. Particle size, take a optimum particle size, it is less than 100 micrometers, which is called as a free flowing powders. Okay, So when we have take any powders or particle size, that should be it not it should be less than 100 micrometers in size. So 100 micrometer is concluded as a free flowing powders. This which powder is free flow in the mixing equipments. Okay. So next come into the particle shape. What type of particle shape we have to choose for the regular mixing process? So what happen when we take some amount of powder during mixing? This mixing powder consists several shapes of particles, which is regular, which is some are irregular, some are curvy shaped, some irregular shaped, some are ovoid, some are longitudinal, some are long in shape. So these are the several types of shapes of particles we have to take during mixing process. But what happens if your particle shape is irregular? So irregular and irregular particles are each other interlocked with each others. Interlocked with each other. Interlocked means their irregular shapes are connected or locked with another particle's irregular shapes. Okay. It is called the interlocked. So when particles are interlocked with each other, it is called agglomerations or segregation with each others. So that's why we have to take minimum amount of powder with a spherical shape. It's but it is sometimes it is difficult to obtain the spherical shape of particles because those vendors are supplying those particles. They are not specified that these particles are spherical or irregular in shape. Okay. So first, it is checked for our side that these particles is spherical or irregular. So that's why we are choosing the mixing equipment depending on the particle shape. Next is the particle charge. Some particles consist different types of charges, electrostatic charges. Those particles have same charge, they are repulsion to each others, and those particles are opposite charge, they are connected or attracted with each others. So when repulsed, that time uniform mixing is not happen, and when connected, that time also segregations occurs. Okay, so due to the presence of particle charge, this is problematic situations happen in this mixing process. So particle charge is created during the frictional forces of particle to particles, or moisture is present into the particles. That time also electrostatic charge or van der Waals forces is created. So you should remember in your mind that during mixing, depending on the conditions and depending on the situation, you have to maintain the particle charge. Next is the proportion of materials. Proportion of materials is means that what which proportions you have to add it during the mixing process. If your mixing vessel is small and you loaded large amount of powders, what happened? The mixing process is automatically stopped. Your buffles, your paddle is not moving in between the powder and the vessels. So you have to put the powders, if we consist two powders or more than two powders, in a equal proportions by weight and volume. If you take 60% of paracetamol, you have to take the 60% of alprazolam or the other drugs. Okay. Those volumes are similar to same proportion you have to take in this mixing process. If larger difference is happening during the mixing process, if larger difference is happening during the mixing process, what happen? The mixing is done according to ascending order. Ascending order means small to large volume. The mixing is process is come from small volume to large volume. If you take two different powders, different weight of powders, if one is 80% and another is the 20%. So same proportion is not happening. So which powder is consist more amount is settled down on the lower surface, and which powder is consist small amount, it is consist into the upward portion of the particles. So your mixing should be happen in the ascending order, means small volume to large volume orders. Okay. Now we come into some criteria for during mixing. You have maintained some criteria during mixing process. So what are the criteria you have to maintain? First option, it is the most important in this mixing process. that powder bed should not be filled more than 60%. If your powder bed means where you powder keep it or where you powder put it into the vessels. The mixing vessels is surface, it is a powder bed. So if your mixing vessels, I think 100 kg, your mixing vessel capacity is 100 kg, but you have put total 100 kg or 80 kg into the vessels. So what happened? It is not properly moving in between the total amount of powder in between there, or its paddle, or its buffles, or its shaft. It is not to move freely in between the powder or the vessels. So you have to put minimum 60% in the vessels or in the powder bed of the equipment. So this is the capacity you have to feed first. Then you have removed the 60% of material, and again you give the 40% of the material into the mixing vessels. So that's proportion you have to maintain during the mixing process. So first you have put the 60% into the mixing vessels, then discharge, and again put the remaining product into the mixing vessels. So that's why we have to maintain the mixing process. Next process is the particles should be subjected to movement in three directions. In the before classes, I am taking say about that, the particles are moved in three dimensional during the mixing process, and this is called the zigzag motions of the powders. So if your particles are moved in three direction, you confirm that your mixing process is suitable for these particles, and your mixing process is done uniformly until the mixing happen. Okay. So you have to check that your mixing process, during the mixing process, your particles are moved in three dimension or not. Next is the shearing force should be sufficient. Shearing force should be sufficient to prevent the aggregations. Here shearing force means the pressures you have to given during the mixing process. Pressures given by blade or pressure given by air pressures. Okay. This shearing force, it should be optimum. Optimum shear force is not harm the products or give a uniform mixtures after the completion of the mixing process. So you have to make a proper shearing force during the mixing, which prevent the aggregations of the particles. Your particle is not joined with each other. So it is called the aggregates, not form a lump. So you maintain a optimum shear force which prevent the formation of the aggregation. Next is the there should be no centrifugal force or centrifugal effect. In previous classes, I have said that the centrifugal force, if created during the mixing process, the it's not properly done until the mixing is stopped. Okay, and during the mixing process, if centrifugal force is happen, what happen? Only middle portion of the mixtures give the mixing process, and the side by side other particles are not mixed with the middle portion of the mixture. Okay, so it is happen only when the centrifugal force is creating during the mixing process. Forces should not cause breakage of the particles. Okay, during the particles, during the mixing process, you have maintained the optimum forces or shear force, that it is not harm or it is not break the particles. Okay, so if your particle is break, so you are not including or you are not maintaining the parameters which have to be supplied to the vendors. Okay, so first you have to maintain the optimum shear force during the mixing process, and mixing process should be stopped abruptly. If you're so that your particles are break down due to the higher shear force, so you have to first abruptly stop the mixing process. Abruptly means the suddenly you have to stop the mixing process. Okay, so these are the criteria of during mixing process you have to maintain until the you get the uniform mixtures. Next come in the what types of equipments we are using in laboratory purpose and the industrial purpose during the solid mixing process. So first classification is based on the flow properties of the powders, and second classification is based on the scale of mixing. Flow property means how amount of powders are freely flow in between the other particles and in the mixing vessels. So depending on the flow properties, they are classified two types of flow properties. First one is the free flowing solids, okay, another is the cohesive solids, which is not free flowing, which is create electrostatic charge with each other and make a aggregate with each other. This is called the cohesive solids. So during the free flowing solids, two blenders are recommended. First one is the V-cone blender and another is the double cone blenders. V-cone blender and double cone blender, which is used in case of free flowing powder, it is not consist any type of blade, any type of paddle or any types of mixing buffers. Okay, it is blank. It is only a blender which is consist any type of blade, paddle or buffers. Okay, because the powders are free flowing. If your powders are free flowing, so it is easily mixed with each others. Okay, so that time any types of shear forces is not to be applied in this mixing process, and shear forces is applied by a device. This device called the paddle, buckles, or any types of forces devices. So if your powders are free flowing, you not to apply any forces. It is automatically mixed with each other. Okay. And next is the cohesive solids. Cohesive solid means they are from segregate during mixing. So you have to break down the segregates during mixing. So that's types of mixture you have to add it. That is the sigma blender and the one is the planetary mixers. It is consist the some amount of blade and buffles and paddles. Next, coming to the scale of mixings. If you're doing small scale, batch type, so that time recommended blenders. First blender is a laboratory purpose, mounted vessels. All of you use it in this laboratory. Next is the Beacon blender with blade, double cone blender with blade, ribbon blender, sigma blender, planetary paddle mixture or fluidized mixtures. And if you going to the large scale, it is a continuous process. The continuous process is happening with the barrel type and zigzag type instruments. Now come into the nature of the mixture, of the mechanism or mixture. It is called nature of mixture means what is the mixture mechanism, which mechanism it is used. First is the batch type. If you're preparing small amount of proportion of material in laboratory, you have to use pestle mortar. Mechanism is the triturations. Okay. Next is the tumbling mixture or cylindrical mixture with no mixing blade. It is only for free flowing powders. No mixing blade is mentioned there. It is means your powder is free flowing. Example, double cone and V-cone blender. Mechanism of action is tumbling. Tumbling means upward and downward movements of the material in the mixing equipment. When your materials during rotations, it is give upward and downward movement. It is called the tumbling actions. Next is the tumbling mixture with blade. If your material is cohesive in nature, okay. If your material is aggregate forms, if your materials are you are manufacturing in the batch scale or batch type manner, so you have to use V-cone blender and double cone blender with mixing blade. Here also maintain the tumbling action with well shearing force you have to apply by using the blade. Next is the static mixtures. Static means stagnant phase, static phase, where material is not moved upward to downward. Here no tumbling action is happening. Here only materials are kept in one side, middle of the instrument or side of the instrument. There it is mixing with the help of mixing blade. So it is called as a static mixture. In case of static mixture, we are using ribbon, sigma and planetary blenders or planetary mixture. Here, mixing is a stationary cell and rotating blade. One stationary or static cell is present where the blade are moving, but materials are not giving the upward and downward movements. Next is the air mixture or fluidized mixtures. Air mixture or fluidized mixtures are used depending on the mechanism of air supply for the mixing process. Okay. It is called the fluidized mixtures. Next is the continuous type. In case of continuous type, we have to use some special mixture. It is called the barrel and the zigzag. They have maintained the continuously process of mixings. Okay. In case of barrel type, this is consist of baffles, and zigzag type, this is consist no baffles, only a zigzag motion instrument which is automatically rotated after giving the materials into the uh, continuous types. So rotating cell with the rotating blade. Okay. So in case of first we have come into the tumblers or cylindrical blenders with no mixing blade. First, it, in case of tumblers or cylindrical blenders, some criteria you have to maintain. This is blender means it is consists no mixing blade means your powder is become free flowing. Okay, and free flowing means your powder is become dry in nature. Okay. Next is the this is made by basically a stainless steel, and the construction is stainless steel made by stainless steel 316 grade SS316 grade in industrial scale, and the age of mixing vessels is 27 degrees. Okay, I am showing that the age of 27 means you show in the picture that two vessels is there in diagrammatically, and first one is a cylindrical blender, another is a cube blenders. Cylindrical blender means it is consist 27-degree edge. Its edge is consist 27 degree. See my pointer. Its edge is consist of 27 degree. If your blender edge is consist 27 degree, one survey report it says that your mixing process is uniform. Okay, because this type no centrifugal force is created in between the mixing process. Okay, but in case of your blending process when it is cube type in shape, that time what happen, it is a chance to create a centrifugal force during the mixing process. So this centrifugal force it causes this centrifugal force it causes the ununiform mixing product we have to get from the mixing process. Okay, first next it is a H27 degrees cases. Now in case of efficiency of tumbler mixer highly depends on the speed of rotations. Okay, depending on the speeds, you have to maintain the mixing process. But you have to maintain the optimized mixing process. If you slow down the mixing process during the tumbling action is slow down. So if your tumbling action is slow down, so there is a mixing process is slowly occurred during the mixing. Okay. If you go into the rapid mixing process, the more tumbling action is there. So that time the particles are interact with each others and causes the segregations or fines given is possible. Segregation of fines means these particles are break down in a finest particles is possible during the rapid rotations. So you have to maintain the optimum mixing pressures between the tumblers or cylindrical blenders with no mixing blades. So according to depending on the optimizations, they have confirmed there's some common range of RPM rapid uh, for mixing in during the mixing process. It is the 30 to 100 RPM. Okay, this is the mixing process. Mixing RPM. So mixing is done by tumbling motions, which is accentuated by the virtue of shape of the containers. So your shape, depending on the your shape of the containers, you have to maintain the mixing process by the tumbling actions. Now, it is the examples of the first example of the free flowing powder mixing process, V-cone blender or twin cell blender. It is called twine cell because it is consists two cell. You have put uh, another material from these cells and another material from these cells, and you have to mixing with each other. Okay, it is basically made by stainless steel and connected with a strong shaft which is attached the a strong mixing equipments. Okay, So material is loaded through the cell hatches and emptying in a normal done through the apex port. Apex port means is a lower port. It is a discharge ports. After mixing process, you have discharged the material by the mixing ports. Okay. So by this process, you have to load 50 to 60% of the total volume of the material into the uh, Beacon blenders. Okay, and if your blender is 20 kg in capacity, so you have to rotate the blender in 35 rpm. If large models means 1 ton capacity, it is rotated in the 15 rpms. So as blender rotates, the materials undergo tumbling motions. So when V is inverted, the material is splits into two portions. Okay, and this process of dividing and recombining continuously to the solid its products, and you have to get the uniform mixture or uniform free flowing powder mixture after the completion of the mixing process. Okay, next come into the second free flowing blender. It is the double cone blenders. Why it is called double cone? Because it is consist two cone in blenders, and it is attached with the as usual with a shaft. Shaft means where it is the total mixing vessel is connected with a shaft to each other, and which shaft is connected with a one type of motor, and motor help to rotate the blender in anti-clockwise or clockwise in manners. Okay, so here two point is there, and any point you have to discharge the materials, and any point you have to input the materials to the into the mixing vessels. So during mixing process, here also you have to maintain the 60% of capacity of product. You have to load in between the depending on the capacity of the blenders, and maintain the 30 to 100 rpm mixing process, 30 to 100 rpm speeds during the mixing process. And here also maintain the tumbling motions or tumbling actions with the double cone blenders. What are the advantages and disadvantages of both blenders? Advantages means if fragile granules are to be blended. If your granules are fragile means it have maximum chance of breakage or fragile by using a optimized pressure. So fragile granules are to be blended by using those blenders easily. Okay. And it is handle the large capacities of product of mixings. It is easy to clean because it is no consist in blade in between the mixing vessels. So it is easy to clean process. And these equipments require minimum maintenance. Okay. Disadvantage first is the installation purpose, because it is consists large space during installations. It is consists the large mixing vessels, large shaft, large motors, which is take a more area for keep it. It is not suitable for ingredients of large differences in particle size distributions. If your products consist large particle size distribution, you have to not blend it. You have not blended by this process because it is no consist any types of blade or any types of paddles. If powders are free flowing, serial dilution is required for the addition of low dose active ingredients. If you're mixing the one low dose active ingredients, means your drug with a large capacities of materials like excipients during the mixing process, you have to maintain the serial dilution, means 1 is to 10. If one portion is the active ingredients, you have to add the 10 portion of the other excipients. That's why it going to the uniform mixings. Otherwise, if you add it the total products and total amount of active ingredients, it is not uniformly mixed with each others with the other excipients. So you have to maintain the serial dilutions during the low proportion of the active ingredients when using with the higher proportion of the excipients. Next, come into the which particles are segregate with each others or aggregate with each others. So you have to break down or prevent the segregation. We are adding some blades in between the previous blenders. It is tumbling blenders, Damping mechanism is happen with adding a searing force by addition of mixing blade. Same model, same Vicon blenders, 10 double cone blenders is there, but here one things is change is here added one type of blade, one type of shaft in these portions. In see this in pictures that first Vicon blenders consist some blade in between there. It is connected with the shaft and shaft also connected with some blade. The blade is prevent the segregations and break the irregular particle into small particles. Okay, and mix uniformly. And as well as the Vicon blender is also consist some blade in between theirs. So directly I'm come into the what are the advantages and the disadvantages of the tumblers with blade. If your products, if your uh, vessels is consist of baffles or blades, it is usual for both wet and dry mixing, because if you try to prepare some granules in between there, so you have using some amount of product with some with using some water or others mixing vehicle, so it is usually help to wet mixing or dry mixing both in the mixing process. Wide range of shearing forces can be applied with agitator. Okay, agitator permitting the intimate the mixing of very fine as well as coarse powder. If you try to break down the product into the fine powders or coarse powders, okay, so you have to change the shear force, change the RPM. That's why the blade make the product in fines and coarse powder as in this depending on their parameters. Next, serial dilution is not needed in this product because it is consist blade. If it is not consist blade, and if your proportion of the active ingredients is low and your excipients is large, that time serial dilution is required. But your in this process, there consists some blade or paddles or buffers. The paddles and buffers are not need to get the serial dilution because they are giving the uniform mixtures after the mixing process with the low proportion of active ingredients with the higher proportion of the excipients. Disadvantage of the tumblers means accretion is large. Side rejections of the friable particles is results. Okay. If your particles consist in fragile in natures, what happened? It is become breakdown with the force of blade into the small particles or fine particles. The fragile particles is not to be handled by this mixing process. Scale up can prove a problems because general principles of scale up do not work. Cleaning may be problem because it is consists large amount of blade. The blade cleaning process is going to be carefully during the mixing blade when to be cleaned. So this is a disadvantage for the cleaning purpose. So this cleaning is done by not manually, it is done by a air jet mixtures. Okay, air jet means it is a gun type instrument which is consist water, and full force you have to jet force give the water for cleaning in between the vessels. So by water's force you have to clean the mixing vessels. Next is the when if your industry you are not using the blenders for mixing, what happened, it is a large amount of mixing process, mixing vessels, so it is not sealed uniformly. It cause some roasters or some moisture is present in between the mixing process which can choke the mixing equipments. Okay. Next come into the ribbon blenders. It is the examples of the static mixtures. Okay. Principles. It is also consist a stainless steel manufacturing units. Okay. These stainless steel manufacturing units consist some ribbon types of blades. Okay. So that's why it is called the ribbon blender. Ribbon means it is sparing or spirally moved in between the mixtures. Why it is called the ribbon. So what happened in these mixtures? Put the lumps or aggregates in between the mixtures. It is moved in the clockwise and anti-clockwise manners, and it's break down the lumps or aggregates easily, okay, in powder bed. But the powder is not move the one side to another side. What happened? It is stay in a one directions or static phase, so where it is not moved from the one side to another sides, okay. So by this process, you have to maintain the ribbon blenders during the mixing process. It is a long acting process. It is the upper portion, so you have to put the material, okay, and is lower portion. It is a discharge point is there. I am showing the discharge point. This is the discharge points. You put the materials from upper side, and by the ribbon blender, when you have to start, it is mixing uniformly or break down the materials, and you have to discharge the product by these portions. Uses uniform size and density materials can be easily mixed, okay, and it is both type of mixing, solid mixing and solid and liquid mixing. Both mixing process you have to done by this mixing process. Advantages: higher shear can be applied during the mixing process by using the ribbon blades, which causes break down the aggregates. And headroom required rate piece is these instruments is required less place during the in the industry. Disadvantage: it is called as a poor mixture because the movements of the particles is two dimensional, because it is static phase. What happened? Two dimensional means when you added the particles in the or group of powder, particles in this mixing process, the one particles are moves into the middle of the portions in one direction, another is the move in the another direction, then again it is settled down or static on their surface. So when it is static, that time the higher amount of powder can clog the mixing blade. This is called the dead spots, okay. In the third point, you have to mention that it is called the dead spots, that when larger amount of particles are static in nature, that time what happened? It is clogged or blockage the way of blade move, okay. So that time the blade cannot move in between the mixing vessels and the powders. So it is called as a dead spots. Okay. That time the mixing process is stopped. So these are the disadvantage of main in ribbon blenders. Next come into the sigma blade mixers. It is another statics mixtures. What happened in this mixture? Why it is called sigma blade mixtures? Because these blades shaped is like a sigma. You know about the sigma equations, because these types of blades they are using. These blades are look like a sigma equations. Okay, it is called the sigma blade, and this blade is consists of pores in between the blades. Pore in between the blades. It is look like a screen. It is also constructed by stainless steel, high grade stainless steel. So it is consist a bowl. Bowl are connected with a shaft, okay, and shaft are also connected with a two blades. First blade and the inside another blade is there, okay. When you put the material in between the mixer blenders, what happen? The blade moves at different speeds, one about twice than others, okay, which allow the movement of the powders from side to centers. Which side powders is attached with the wall of the vessels, it have to clean the powders and come into the centers. The materials also moves top to downwards and gets seared between the blades and the wall, and tough resulting cascading actions. Perforated blades, it is consists of perforated blades which also break the lumps, okay, which particles are moved during the mixing, move through the pores. That time the large particles, when it is moved through a small pores, it is break down into the small particles, so it is break the lumps and aggregates which create the higher shear forces, okay. So this is the total mixing process of the six sigma blade mixtures. Come into the uses and advantage disadvantage. First use is the sigma blade mixture. It is used in case of manufacturing industry for weight granulation purpose, as well as tablets, small tablets, pill or ointments preparations. It is used in case of semi-solid preparation also, and as well as it is used for liquid preparations with solid mixing liquid, although it can be used for solid mixing. Advantage: Sigma blend mixer can create a minimum dead space during the mixings. Dead space means it is create a free space during the mixing. That times free space, what happen? The mixing blade when rotate with each others, minimum dead space is required. If your dead space is not there, your blades are connected with each others, and this is a chance of blade explosions with the instruments and the powders. So dead space means it is a some space in between the blades movements. If your powders is entered in between the space, what happens? The blade is automatically stopped. So dead space which helps the powder release in between the two blades. And it is also close tolerances between the blades and side walls as well as bottom and the mixer cells. Disadvantage: Sigma blade mixture work at a fixed speed. It has no changing RPMs process. It has a fixed speed, and this speed is also maintained from the end process and the starting of the process to the end of the process. Next, in the another static mixture, it is the planetary mixers. It is looks like a normal mixer grinder or egg blender. Okay, it consists three types of blades. Okay, depending on the product, you have to change this blade. This is totally look like a normal blending process made by stainless steel. It is consist one vessels, and vessels are connected with a normal blade. Okay, normal blending process. Just in this process, you have put the product on the vessels and start the machines. It consists a RPM changing regulators. By this process, you have to change the RPM. Okay. In this process, first one handle is there into the lower end. You have to check in this picture. This by this handle, you have up and down movements. You have create a up and down movements of the blade or the mixings. Okay, you are adjusting the blade. You are adjusting the mixing with the vessels by this handle. Uses: break down the agglomerates rapidly. Low speeds are used for dye blending and fast for weight graduations. Okay. Advantages: speed of rotations can be varied at will. Okay. Depending on the materials you have to fill, you have to maintain the speed of rotations. More usuals for weight granulation process, but it is small purpose. Disadvantage: mechanical heat is built up within the powder mix because it is a blending process and it is connected with another mixing vessels. So during process, if your RPM speed is high, that time some temperature is activated during the mixing process. If your product is thermosensitive or heat sensitive, these types of materials are not suitable by this mixing process. Okay. It requires high powers and limited size and useful for batch work only. It is not useful for continuous process. It is only for batch or small scale purpose. Not it is used for large scale purpose. It is the most popular mixtures in industry. It is the air mixtures or fluidized mixtures, and its basic mechanisms is happening with the applying air into the mixing process. That is no consist any type of blade, no consist any type of buffers. Their main mechanism is the air supply. In these instruments, it is a used for large scale purpose. Okay, the in the bottom of the layer, you show the instrument or equipment that three rigid layer. One rigid layer is there, which is consists of pores, and by these pores are connected with a gas inlet or air inlet process, and this is connected with a heater, which heater keep you have to use during the, and it has some similarity with the drying process also. This is a two-in-one process. It is mixing process as well as product drying process. When you preparing some granules, okay, you have to put the wet granules in these mixtures, And in this process, the wet granules become dry and also mixed with other granules. So in this process, you have entered a air or force of air by this rigid layer in the bottom present in the equipment, and air is uh, give a tumbling actions or spiral movements to the powders, and that's why in due to the presence of spiral movements and to the mixing process, the granules or the powders are mixed with each others. Again, the after mixings, the gas is outlet by the upper portions. It is the outlet portion of the gas. Advantage, it is shorten the mixing time. It is the most efficient mixing process. Okay, and this is a particularly used for wet granulation techniques of the tablets preparations. In the industry, it is named as fluidized bed dryer. Fluidized means air. Basically, fluid is the air. Okay, air is the fluid or air is the main mode of actions which did the blending process, mixing process, or drying process. You show that it is connected with some vessels in the lower portions. You have put the material in between the vessels. Okay, and these vessels is connected with some pores or screen, and this screening process are connected with the hot air or normal air, and the air entrapment in between the powders, and powders are get into the large vessels. And what happened, the due to the presence of air, it give a tumbling actions in between the each others, and due to the presence of tumbling actions, the upward and downward movements causes the powder mixer are mixed with each others. Okay, and when you have to use the hot air, that time the products are to be helped to dry in this mixing process. Okay, so this fluidized bed dryer you have seen in this drying chapter in pharmaceutical engineering. Next is come into the continuous mixing process or large scale mixing process. In the continuous mixing process, the first one is the barrel time. Okay. Barrel time mixing process. Why it is called barrel? Because it is consists of blade. It consists of baffles in during the mixings. I am showing the pictures that what is baffles. Baffles means a fixed attachments or fixed some sharp edges which is attached with the mixing vessels, but it is not moving. The vessels is moving, powders are stacked with the baffles and break down in a small particles or mixing with each others. And it is consists of small baffles and the large baffles. The small baffles are helped to mix the process, mixing mixture powder, and the large baffles are helped to break down the large particle into the small particles. That is the main mechanism. It is the upper portion, it is the inlet portions of the powder material and directly input into the mixing vessels, and it is connected with a shaft. It is rotating by using a motor. Okay, this blue portion, it is a motor which is helped to rotate the vessels, and lower portions, it is a discharge point. By this portion you have collect the proportion of powder by this process. Next come, it is a zigzag continuous blenders. In this process, it is a zigzag. Why it is called zigzag? Because its shapes is like a zigzag manners. Its shapes is like a zigzag manners. In this process, it has no consist any blades or buffers. It is only rotating with the clockwise and anti-clockwise manners. The V-shaped portions, it is a connected portions of actual mixing with the each other of the particles. The during the process, when you put the material into the mixing vessels, it is rotated by using these motors. What happened? The zigzag motion is created in between the mixers. So charged materials is first split into two or more proportions during the mixing. First one of half of materials are moved backward. Okay, means this is the peak, this is the V shape, and is before it the half of the proportion is there, and its next is the half of proportion is there, and during mixing it is mixed with each other. So these V sections It clears the charge and and help to enter the fresh feeds or fresh material into the another materials into the V-shaped. So it is used for continuous blending of solids. It is used for the continuous process for the powders. I am showing the cross sections of this process that you have they have chooses there's caffeine and lactose in these powders, and this process is only for dry powder mixtures. Not any type of wet materials you are not mixing by this process. Only dry powder you have to mixed by this process. Okay, because it is no consist any buffles or lump breakers blades. This is the caffeine inlet point of the materials, and inlet point it is come into the this area drum sections. After it is rotated, the materials is come into the drum section directly into the these zigzags V-shaped portions, and these V-shaped portions are give the mixing process. Okay. And this is the outlet portions of the materials. So this is the all of the equipments what are using in the mixing process. So any questions regarding these chapters?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, what is the meaning of scale up?
Scale up means when you put the particles in a large quantity. If your particle, if your total product size is 50 kg, okay, you have charged the particle means you have put the particles in a large vessels. You means is maintain a 50 kg scale in between the mixing vessels and the particles. So your scale is 50 kg.
ওকে স্যার। স্যার আমার না আগের দিনের থেকে একটা ডাউট আছে।
বলো।
স্যার বলছি মিক্সিং ইন্ডিসেসটা না একটু বুঝতে পারেন, একটু বুঝিয়ে দেবেন?
One minute. Yeah, mixing index. What is called the mixing index? Mixing index means what is the degree of mixing you have to maintain during the mixing process. তুমি যখন মিক্সিং প্রসেসটা কন্টিনিউ করছো সেই টাইমে what is the quality of mixing, what is the uniformity of mixing, what is the degree of mixing. Degree of mixing means what type of product you have to get during the mixing process. Okay, the degree of mixing is depending on the three parameters. First one is the mixing speed, mixing capacity, mixing size, সেই এই এতগুলো প্যারামিটার তুমি যখন মেনটেন করছো ইন ডিউরিং মিক্সিং প্রসেস, তো ফার্স্ট কি হয়, যদি কোনো কারণে কোনো একটা প্যারামিটার হ্যাম্পার করে তখন মিক্সিং ইন্ডেক্স অটোমেটিক্যালি কমতে থাকবে। মিক্সিং ইন্ডেক্স যত ভ্যালু যত বেশি হবে ইওর প্রোডাক্ট কোয়ালিটি তত ভালো। তো এটাকে ক্যালকুলেট করা হয় বাই স্ট্যান্ডার্ড ডেভিয়েশন, স্ট্যান্ডার্ড ডেভিয়েশন অফ র্যান্ডম স্যাম্পলিং। তো র্যান্ডম স্যাম্পলিং আমরা কিভাবে করব? র্যান্ডম স্যাম্পলিং করতে গেলে ফার্স্ট যখন মিক্সিং প্রসেস আমি শুরু করছি, শুরু করার সাথেই আমি যখন প্রোডাক্ট দিলাম তারপর 5 মিনিটস রান করলাম, 5 মিনিট মিক্সিং প্রসেসটা হলো। ফার্স্ট আমি একটা স্যাম্পলিং করলাম 10 mg, আমি পাউডার ওখান থেকে স্যাম্পলিং করলাম, ওকে, বাই স্যাম্পলিং রডস। স্যাম্পলিং করার পর সেটাকে একটা পাউচের মধ্যে নিলাম, ওকে। নেক্সট কি করলাম, মিক্সিং এ ইন্টারমিডিয়েট প্রসেস, মানে যখন যেখানে একদম মিডল পোর্শন অফ মিক্সিং প্রসেস চলছে, কমপ্লিট নয় মিডল পোর্শন, তখন সেখান থেকে আমি একটা র্যান্ডম ব্লেন্ড নিলাম। র্যান্ডম ব্লেন্ড নেওয়ার পর একদম প্রোডাক্ট যখন শেষ হয়ে গেল, একদম ফাইনাল প্রোডাক্ট আমি পেলাম, সেখান থেকে আমি একটা র্যান্ডম স্যাম্পল নিলাম। 3টে স্যাম্পল আমার কাছে রইল। তো বাই দিস 3টে স্যাম্পল আমরা ডিটারমাইন করতে পারবো হোয়াট টাইপ অফ মিক্সিং ইউ হ্যাভ টু গেন ফ্রম দি মিক্সিং প্রসেস। তো ফার্স্ট আমি যেটা করতে পারবো সেটা হচ্ছে মিক্সিং ইন্ডেক্স ইকুয়ালস টু, ওখান থেকে আমাকে স্ট্যান্ডার্ড ডেভিয়েশন ক্যালকুলেট করতে হবে বাই ইউজিং অ্যারিথমেটিক মিন। তো স্ট্যান্ডার্ড ডেভিয়েশন ক্যালকুলেট করার পর স্ট্যান্ডার্ড ডেভিয়েশন অফ র্যান্ডম ব্লেন্ড, মানে যেটা মিডল পোর্শন আমি ব্লেন্ড নিয়েছিলাম মাঝখানে, ডিভাইডেড বাই স্ট্যান্ডার্ড ডেভিয়েশন অফ দ্য ফিনিশড ব্লেন্ড, মানে স্যাম্পল ব্লেন্ড, লাস্ট ব্লেন্ডার। দুটোকে যদি আমি
স্যার বলছি র্যান্ডম ব্লেন্ডটা কি মানে ইন্টারমিডিয়েটটা?
yes intermediate at the middle phase of the mixing process,
আর স্যাম্পল ব্লেন্ড মানে লাস্টে যেটা নিচ্ছি?
finished
ওকে স্যার, ওকে স্যার।
আর ফার্স্ট যেটা নিচ্ছি একদম প্রথমে সেটা হচ্ছে আনমিক্স পাউডার, মানে তখনও প্রপারলি মিক্স হয়নি। ওকে
ওকে স্যার।
স্যার বলছি যে অ্যাডিশন মিনস অফ অর্ডার মিক্সিংটা আরেকবার বলবেন?
হ্যাঁ বলো।
অ্যাডিশন মিনস অফ অর্ডার মিক্সিংটা থার্ড পয়েন্টটা।
থার্ড পয়েন্ট মানে কোথায় থার্ড পয়েন্ট বলছো বলো? আগের ক্লাসে?
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ।
অ্যাডিশন মিন্স দি ফোর্স ক্রিয়েটেড উইথ ইচ আদার্স। অ্যাডিশন কখন হয়? যখন দুটো প্রোডাক্টের মধ্যে ফ্রিকশনস খুব ভালো থাকে। ফ্রিকশন কজেস প্রোডাক্ট হ্যাম্পারও করতে পারে, আবার যদি ফ্রিকশনস যদি না থাকে, অ্যাডিশন যদি না থাকে, সেক্ষেত্রেও প্রোডাক্ট আবার মিক্সিং প্রসেস হ্যাম্পার করতে পারে। তো যদি প্রোডাক্টটা খুবই পলিশিং নেচার হয়, ধরো দুটো পার্টিকলস খুবই পলিশড, কিন্তু দুটোর মধ্যে কোনো অ্যাডহিয়ারিং ফোর্স নেই, কোনো চার্জ ক্রিয়েট নেই, তাহলে কি হবে? মিক্সিং প্রসেস হবে না। যদি পার্টিকলস সারফেস সামান্য একটু রাফ হয়, তাহলে কি হবে? সেক্ষেত্রে অ্যাডহিয়ারিং ক্যাপাসিটি থাকবে বা ফ্রিকশনাল ফোর্স তৈরি করবে। সো ডিউ টু ফ্রিকশনস দি পার্টিকলস আর অ্যাডহিয়ার টু ইচ আদার্স। যখন পার্টিকলস দুটোর মধ্যে অ্যাডহিয়ার করতে থাকবে, তখন পার্টিকলস গুলো কি হবে? আস্তে আস্তে ডিউ টু ফ্রিকশনাল ফোর্স ইট ইজ কাম ইনটু দ্য স্মল পার্টিকলস। স্মল পার্টিকলসে যখন এসে গেল, তখন তাদের সারফেস এরিয়া অনেক বেশি হয়ে গেল। তো ডিউ টু দ্য সারফেস এরিয়া ইট ইজ বিকাম অর্ডারলি মিক্সড উইথ ইচ আদার্স। তো যত সারফেস এরিয়া বেশি হবে, তত মিক্সিং প্রসেসটা ভালো হবে।
স্যার বলছি যে ট্রেসার মেটেরিয়াল মানে কি?
ট্রেস মেটেরিয়াল, ট্রেস অফ মেটেরিয়াল না ট্রেসার মেটেরিয়াল, কোনটা বলছো?
ট্রেসার মেটেরিয়াল।
ট্রেসার মেটেরিয়াল মিন্স যখন কোনো মেটেরিয়ালস তুমি ফার্স্ট প্রোডাক্ট কোনো ইকুইপমেন্টস এর মধ্যে ইনক্লুড করলে, ঠিক আছে, সেখান থেকে তুমি কিছু অ্যামাউন্ট অফ প্রোডাক্ট গোয়িং ফর অ্যানালিসিস, গোয়িং ফর টেস্টিং, ঠিক আছে, যে প্রোডাক্টটা তুমি কালেক্ট করছো ডিউরিং দি মিক্সিং প্রসেস, সেটাকে বলা হচ্ছে ট্রেসার মেটেরিয়ালস ফর ট্রেসিং।
ওকে স্যার।
আজকের ক্লাসে কোনো ডাউট আছে আজকে মিক্সিং প্রসেসে?
স্যার হ্যালো স্যার,
হ্যাঁ বলো।
ওই রিবন ব্লেন্ডারে 2 ডাইমেনশনাল হয় কেন, ওটা একবার বুঝিয়ে দেবেন?
বুঝে গেছি। কোনটা বলছো? এটা রিবনে, তাই তো?
হ্যাঁ, রিবন ব্লেন্ডার।
হ্যাঁ, রিবন ব্লেন্ডারের ব্লেডটা কেমন দেখতে? রিবন টাইপ। রিবন মানে বোঝো তো? স্পাইরাল,
হ্যাঁ,
ঠিক আছে,
স্পাইরাল।
ওকে। স্পাইরাল হলে কি হয়? যখন কোনো মেটেরিয়াল স্পাইরাল ইন নেচার, তখন তার কি ক্যাপাসিটি থাকে? একটা প্রোডাক্ট দেখো, এখানে ব্লেডটা কেমন ভাবে আছে, একটা ইউনি ডাইরেকশনাল, একটা হচ্ছে বাই ডাইরেকশনাল। মানে একটা ব্লেড আছে ক্লকওয়াইজ, আবার ঘুরে সেই ব্লেডটা আবার অ্যান্টি ক্লকওয়াইজ আসছে। যখন
হ্যাঁ।
মেটেরিয়ালস তুমি ওর মধ্যে দিচ্ছ তখন কি হবে, কিছু মেটেরিয়াল ফার্স্ট যে ইউনিডাইরেকশনাল ব্লেডটা আছে সেটা দিয়ে একটা ডাইরেকশনে যাবে, তাই তো?
হ্যাঁ
ফার্স্ট
হ্যাঁ
ডাইরেকশন হলো, মানে
হ্যাঁ
ফার্স্ট ডাইমেনশন হলো। আর
হ্যাঁ
কিছু মেটেরিয়াল কি হলো, এদিক থেকে আবার বাই ডাইরেকশনালি ওই দিকে যাবে, তাহলে কি আর একটা সেকেন্ড ডাইমেনশন পেলে। ঠিক আছে, তাহলে দুদিক থেকে দুটো ডাইমেনশন মেনটেন করছে। দুটো ডাইমেনশনের কারণে কি হচ্ছে, প্রোডাক্টটা এসে একটার সাথে একটা অ্যাটাচ হচ্ছে। ফার্স্ট থাকছে টু ডাইমেনশনাল, টু ডাইমেনশনাল থেকে এসে ফার্স্ট তারপর হচ্ছে মেটেরিয়ালগুলো একসাথে অ্যাটাচ হচ্ছে বা মিক্সিং হচ্ছে। ঠিক আছে, এই জন্য এটাকে টু ডাইমেনশনাল প্রসেস বলা হচ্ছে। বাকি ব্লেড গুলো কি
একটা
হয়, বাকি ব্লেড গুলো বলো।
মানে একটা ক্লকওয়াইজ আর একটা অ্যান্টি ক্লকওয়াইজ হচ্ছে।
হ্যাঁ, ব্লেডটা দেখলে তুমি বুঝতে পারবে। সেকেন্ড পিকচারটা দেখো, দেখবে একটা ব্লেড এদিকে বেরিয়ে আছে, একটা ব্লেড এদিকে বেরিয়ে আছে। ঠিক আছে, তাহলে যে ব্লেডটা এদিকে আছে সেটা রোটেট হয়ে একদম শেষ পর্যন্ত গেছে, আর যেটা ইউনিডাইরেকশনাল সেটা ইউনিডাইরেকশনালি হয়ে আবার এন্ড অবধি গেছে। তাহলে ফার্স্ট বেস্ট ব্লেডটা একটা ডাইমেনশন মেইনটেইন করবে, সেকেন্ড ব্লেডটা আরেকটা ডাইমেনশন মেইনটেইন করবে।
আচ্ছা।
স্যার হেডরুম মানে কি? স্যার
হ্যাঁ,
স্যার বলছি হেডরুম মানে কি? হেডরুম
হেডরুম মিন্স হচ্ছে যে রুমটাতে বা যে পার্টিকুলার পজিশনটাতে তোমার ইকুইপমেন্টটা এস্টাবলিশ করা হবে বা ইনস্টল করা হবে। ধরো তোমার ঘরেতে একটা মেশিন বসাবে, তাহলে তোমার ঘরটা হচ্ছে হেডরুম, ইনস্টলেশন পোর্শন।
ওকে স্যার।
স্যার এফবিডিটা একবার বলে দেবেন? হ্যালো।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, এফবিডি।
হ্যাঁ।
এফবিডিটা হচ্ছে তোমাদের ড্রয়িং প্রসেস, তোমরা ড্রয়িং চ্যাপ্টারে গিয়ে এফবিডিটা পড়বে। কিন্তু আমি এফবিডিটা এখানে কেন বললাম, কারণ এফবিডির সাথে ফ্লুইডাইজড বেড মিক্সচার বা ফ্লুইডাইজড মিক্সচারের একটা মিল আছে। কি মিল? দুটোতেই এয়ার ইউজ করা হচ্ছে। ইন কেস অফ মিক্সিং প্রসেস আমি কুল এয়ার ইউজ করতে পারি, ঠিক আছে, কিন্তু
হ্যাঁ
কুল এয়ার ইউজ করলে সেখানে একটা চান্স থাকে যে তোমার প্রোডাক্টটা ময়েশ্চার নিয়ে নিতে পারবে। কিন্তু
হ্যাঁ
কুল নয়, একটা অপটিমাইজ ড্রাই এয়ার বা হট এয়ার সেখানে অ্যাপ্লাই করা হয় ডিউরিং দ্য মিক্সিং। ঠিক এফবিডি বা ফ্লুইডাইজ বেড ড্রায়ার সেই মেকানিজমটাও একই, সেখানে একটা হট এয়ার অ্যাপ্লাই করা হচ্ছে। ঠিক আছে, দুটোতেই
আচ্ছা
কি থাকে, একটা লোয়ার পোর্শনে দেখো, পয়েন্টারটা দেখো, লোয়ার পোর্শনে একটা ভেসেল আছে, একটা বড় ভেসেল দেখতে পাচ্ছ।
হ্যাঁ
ভেসেলটার মধ্যে ভেসেলটা কিন্তু ডিটাচ করা যায়, মানে খোলা যায় এখান থেকে। এই যে তলায় যে
আচ্ছা
দেখবে হুইল লাগানো আছে, চাকা লাগানো আছে, চাকাটাকে ধরে টানলে এটা বেরিয়ে আসে।
আচ্ছা
এই ভেসেলটার মধ্যে একটা স্ক্রিন আছে, একদম নিচের পোর্শনে স্ক্রিন। যেভাবে তোমরা
আচ্ছা
চালনি দেখো, চালনি মেস, মানে একটা স্ক্রিন আছে। এই স্ক্রিনগুলোর মধ্যে দিয়ে এয়ারটা আমি পাঠাতে পারি। এর তলায় একটা পোর্শন আছে যেখান দিয়ে হট এয়ার এই স্ক্রিনগুলোর মধ্যে দিয়ে পাঠানো যায়। এবার এয়ারটা ডাইরেক্ট কার সাথে ডাইরেক্ট কানেক্টেড হবে, উইথ এ প্রোডাক্ট। ফার্স্ট পিকচারটা গেলে বুঝতে পারবে, এখানে তোমার হচ্ছে প্রোডাক্টটা থাকবে, এটা হচ্ছে স্ক্রিন। প্রোডাক্টটা যখনই এয়ারের সাথে ইন্টারাক্ট হবে, প্রোডাক্টটা কি করবে, আস্তে 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 টাম্বলিং অ্যাকশন শুরু করবে। টাম্বলিং অ্যাকশন মিন্স প্রোডাক্টগুলো আস্তে আস্তে এই টোটাল এরিয়াটার মধ্যে স্প্রেড হয়ে যাবে। যত স্প্রেড হবে, যত এয়ার ভেতরে আমি ইনলেট করতে থাকবো, তত ইউনিফর্ম মিক্সিং আমি পাবো। তো ডিউরিং ইউনিফর্ম মিক্সিং কি হচ্ছে, যদি হট এয়ার আমি অ্যাপ্লাই করি, মিক্সিং এর সাথে সাথে প্রোডাক্টটা ড্রাই হয়ে যাচ্ছে। আমি যদি চাই যে এখানে ওয়েট গ্র্যানুলসকে আমি ড্রাই করব, আমি ওয়েট গ্র্যানুলসকে ড্রাই করতে পারি। ওকে, সেই
আচ্ছা
জন্য এটা কি করে, মিক্সিং টাইমটাকে শর্টেন করে দেয়, কমিয়ে দেয়। এই জন্য এফিশিয়েন্ট মিক্সিং হয়, একটার সাথে একটা পার্টিকেল এন্টার করতে পারে না, কারণ কন্টিনিউয়াসলি পার্টিকেলস গুলো ওই এনভায়রনমেন্টের মধ্যে স্প্রেড করছে বাই ইউজিং দি এয়ার, বাই ইউজিং দি হট এয়ার। সেই জন্য একটার সাথে
আচ্ছা
এগ্রিগেট হওয়ার চান্স খুব কম। সেই জন্য এটা
আচ্ছা
মোর এফিশিয়েন্ট ফর মিক্সিং প্রসেস।
স্যার এখানে প্রোডাক্টটা কোথায় থাকে? এই এই জায়গা এই পিকচারে?
এই যে মিক্সিং ভেসেল যেটা তোমাকে বললাম, একটা ভেসেল রয়েছে, এই ভেসেলটার স্ক্রিনের উপর প্রোডাক্টটা দিয়ে দেওয়া হয়, দিয়ে এটাকে অ্যাটাচ করে দিলে এয়ার যেই সাপ্লাই করবে, এয়ারটা কি করবে, প্রোডাক্টটাকে নিয়ে উপরে উঠবে।
আর তার নিচে দিয়ে একটা পাস করা হয়, তাই তো?
টোটাল এর ফোর্স থাকে হচ্ছে 1200 আরপিএম অফ এয়ার।
আচ্ছা
আমি এটা দিয়ে দিচ্ছি তোমাদের ফিডব্যাক ফর্মটা। I'm sharing the attendance form, the attendance link. I'm also give it in the Google Classroom also. Any questions or okay? So I end the class for today.